Welcome to our second session in our Financial Freedom Seminar with Dr. Jeff Crum. And looking forward to the topic tonight, which is budgeting. But I want us to open in prayer and then Dr. Crum will proceed. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for what we're learning, how we're being instructed to be good stewards of that which you have committed to us, to our management. And I pray that we'll glorify you in that. It all belongs to you, but you have, in a sense, loaned it to us to glorify you. And I pray that we'll learn how to do that better this evening in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right. Well, I want to welcome everyone as well. And Pastor, thank you for allowing me to teach. I love to teach. But more than that, I like to help people move from where they are to a better place. So the topic for today is our budget. Now, budget is sometimes a dirty word. It's an uncomfortable word. So I like to reframe the word budget to a spending plan. In our families, we don't have a lot of bureaucracy. I've had some jobs where I have to push the budget through several levels of bureaucracy. But in our families, it's usually just between the husband and the wife. And typically one of those is more dominant and the other one's more passive whenever it comes to money. One tends to be very active about keeping track of things. The other one is not so active. Sometimes folks have separate accounts and then they come together and have a joint account. Families handle money differently. So I don't know how your particular family applies to the topic today, but you'll have to come together in order to work out your budget. And we'll talk about different aspects of the budget. But before we do that, we want to review things from last week. And we'll review this very quickly. I'm not going to reteach it. And then I'm going to add to what we did last week biblically, a little bit more biblical foundation for us to think about. Then we'll work through some budget topics. Toward the end of the budget conversation, we've got a whole slide on how to save money that you can look forward to. And then after that, we'll talk just a little bit about debt. That's the conversation for next week. But if you can go ahead and collect the numbers that I asked for about debt, whenever I show you the ratios and the formulas next week, you'll be able to very quickly place those in your budget. And Lord willing, come next Sunday night as you're following along with us, or maybe Monday if you need to talk to me about some specific numbers that affect you. But in a week or 10 days here, you'll be able to make some changes in your budget. And it usually takes 45 or 60 days to really feel those, but some of those you might feel right away. It just takes a little while to catch up with all kinds of bills that are straight out there, maybe 1 or 2 billing cycles if you start making some adjustments. But let's review our purpose for why we're here. Our church exists to evangelize the lost and edify believers. And part of edifying the believers is helping one another do better at living life. Our purpose today is to grow stronger in our finances, and faith is very important whenever we talk about finances. And we'll talk a little bit about how faith and finances interact as we talk about the budget. Remember our pyramid? Our first thing, this is our topic for the day, cash flow, which is our income and our expenses. That is our spending plan, and we can't spend what we don't have, although some of us have, and that creates debt. So those are the topics we're talking about this week and next week. And then after that, we'll talk about protection. And our first line of protection is an emergency fund or a cash reserve. And then after that, we have various levels of insurance as we need them. They may be self-insurance, or we may pay some company to do it. Most of us can't afford to self-insure for our health because one little trip to the hospital on a bad day could easily be 6 figures or more. So, and then finally, we talk about future income because we want to set aside money today that we're earning today for those times whenever we don't work in the future. So let's review our biblical foundation. Last week, we talked about Matthew 25 with the wise and the ungodly stewards. And then this week, we'll talk a little bit about some wise saying from Proverbs. And then I may mention some things from Luke as well. So last week, I like to talk about this as the 3-2-1. There were 3 stewards, 2 were winners, and 1 was a loser. And I'm not going to read all the scripture again, but I want to remind you that the Lord was leaving. The Lord, think of them as the king or the boss. The boss was going away and gave one steward 5 talents or 5 bags of silver or 5 years' salary. to manage, and gave another steward 2 talents, 2 bags of silver. And then another steward only got 1. And remember what happened. He that got the 5 talents doubled the money. And he that got the 2 talents doubled the money. And the result, or the grading of the Lord, whenever he came back to assess the situation, was, well done. You're good. You're faithful. We can continue a good relationship together. Enter thou into the joy of the Lord. You've got a happy relationship with the boss. On the other hand, the one that only received 1 talent, he was a fraidy cat. He said, I was afraid, and I went and hid the talent in the earth. He buried his treasure. Now, silver's not going to rot in the earth, but there are lots of things that if we don't maintain them, they go bad. What happens if we bury paper money in the backyard? Well, paper money has a lot of silk and other things in it. It's very durable, but it will decay over time. Money also loses value. It's called inflation. And think about it. Whenever I was young, a stamp was, I don't know, maybe I remember an 8-cent stamp or a 13-cent stamp, and now we're looking at 50-cent stamps. So we're looking at 3 to 4 times the amount. 50 cents would have bought several stamps whenever I was a small child. Now it only buys 1. Of course, we also have new technology, and email's free, but it's not, because we pay $50 or $60 or $80 a month for the internet, and then we make a payment on the computer to run the internet. So the fearful manager was called out and reprimanded. And the Lord called him wicked and slothful. He even said, you know I'm the boss, and I reap where I don't sow, because I have these investments and people working for me all over. You should have gone to the market. You should have done something with the exchangers. You should have brought me back my talent with usury, and usury is the growth. So not only did that fearful and ungodly steward lose the talent that he had, and he lost the time that he spent with that talent, but it was given to the guy with 10 talents, and the rich get richer while the poor get poorer, and the poor is whining about it, but the poor guy is the one who hid it and was afraid. Maybe he should have gone to his 2 buddies. They must have worked together. Maybe he should have gone to his 2 buddies and said, what do I do with this, and gotten some advice. But it's interesting that the Bible says, even here, that unto everyone that hath been given, he shall have abundance. And him that's not, it's taken away, and cast the unprofitable, fire that unprofitable servant. And emotionally and mentally, whenever we go through these times in our lives, it is like being cast into outer darkness. But the good thing is, Lamentations tells us that God's mercies are new every morning, and we can start over tomorrow. Now, we may have to dig out of the hole that we're in, but we don't have to dig another hole. That's an important thing to remember now. If you want to make some changes, you need to make them. Let's look at Genesis. Just remember that God blessed them in the very beginning after creation. God blessed Adam and Eve and told them to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. Now, those are 3 different things. It means to be productive, but exponentially productive. And then that's not enough, but we also have to subdue the earth. And God outlines the fish of the sea, the fowl of the air, and everything that moves on the earth. And of course, now we've subdued things like water and wind and fire. We have a lot of dominion over the earth and the fullness thereof. Now, in Proverbs 23, there are lots of wise sayings that were collected by Solomon and gathered together. But let's look at these. Labor not to be rich. Cease from thy own wisdom. Get help. There's wisdom in counsel. Wilt thou set thine eyes upon that which is not? For riches certainly make themselves wings. Riches are not. They're just like the wind. They fly away like an eagle toward heaven. Riches come and go. Sometimes I tell folks that money comes and goes. But our health, our time only goes. Money is much like the fuel in our gas tank. We go to the gas station and we fill our tank, and then we use our gas. Now, sometimes I have an older Cadillac, and it's gotten as many as 27 miles per gallon. But not long ago, we were working on it. We took the battery loose, the computer was reset, and then we started the engine. And the engine was running, but no miles were being gained. We were not only getting zero miles per gallon, but we were spending hours per gallon. So we were losing in two ways. The car's made to go a distance, and it wasn't going a distance, but it was running and costing us money because it was running. Let's look at some more wise sayings. This is about the guy who offers us his dainty meat, his fine meal. And he says, eat and drink, but his heart's not in it. The morsel that you've eaten shall be vomited up, and it will lose the sweet words. How many times have we been enticed with this looks wonderful, it's the greatest, it's the newest, it's the biggest, it's shiny. Fast, shiny things grab our attention. Many times the shine wears off very soon. Just this afternoon, I looked at a camper. It's very good condition inside, but outside the fiberglass is showing some fibers and the paint is faded, and it's only 7 years old. And there are cracks on the roof. It's going to take on water soon if it's not maintained. Many of these things look shiny when we start. They don't last very long. A few more things. Let not thine heart envy sinners. Oh, envy, jealousy. This can get us into trouble with our budget and debt. And the ends of the budget crisis and the debt are unexpected. But hear thou, my son, and be wise. Guide thine heart in the way. Listen to me. When we lived in Wisconsin, my son wanted to stop and look at a motorcycle beside the road. And there was this old guy that came out. He really wasn't much older than me, but he'd had a hard life. He was wrinkly and you know the type. They've lived a rough life. My son kept saying this and this, and he turned around and said to my son, son, listen to your father. He's lived your life twice already. That was fascinating because I've been a child. I've been a young adult. And now I'm the adult and soon to be grandparents. This is kind of like my third time around life. There is wisdom in experience. Ask for someone about their experience. Let's see a couple more. We're going to stop in Proverbs 23 here in a moment, but this goes into some fascinating stuff because it talks about poverty, and poverty follows alcoholism and living a rough life that way. And it really goes into drugs, sex, and alcohol and addictions. Now, some of us have addictions that are pretty. They might be chocolate or shopping or sugar, but all of these things tend to lead us down. And we need to manage our desires, whether they are good things that we take too much of or bad things that we shouldn't take of at all. You can read this for yourself in Proverbs 23. But it really does talk about all kinds of addictions there. Let's move on. In Luke 12, Jesus says, consider the ravens. They don't sow their seed. They don't have a storehouse or a barn, but God feeds them. How much are you better than the fowls? And verse 27 talks about consider the lilies. They don't worry. They don't toil. They just grow back and forth and look beautiful. And they do look beautiful. But look at verse 28. If then God so clothe the grass, if God covers the dirt with grass, which is today in the field, and tomorrow that grass is cut and burned for bricks or heat, whatever it is, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? Now we're back to the finances and faith. We have to have faith. Faith and hope kind of come together, don't they? Now, there's a lot more here. Don't be double-minded. When we're double-minded, that challenges our faith. It actually stresses us out because we're trying to go two different directions and we're stumbling because we can't keep track of the one. We're tripping over the other. Maybe we're telling lies to ourselves. Remember, we talked about that last week. Whenever we tell these lies, we have to keep up with them. And now we're trying to keep up with the truth, and we're trying to keep up with who we told the lies to. And whenever we lie to ourselves, that makes us the liar. and also the victim of the lies. And then we get really messed up. But remember, fear not, little flock. It's your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. God wants us to be successful. And we have to have hope and faith in that. And then as we seek the kingdom, we find clarity about a lot of things. Now we want to talk about cash flow, which is our budget. Our budget is simply a written record of what's coming in and what's going out. We can have that budget made in advance to help us make spending choices. We put our priorities in the budget so that we spend on the priorities first. People who get into trouble with money are impulsive with money. They have money or plastic in their pocket, they see something and they grab it. And they make an expense out of something that they feel is urgent and important. And then they look back in the future and realize it's not so important. Remember last week I mentioned things like charging meals on a credit card? And it's not wrong to pay for a meal with a credit card, but it's a really poor idea to charge your meals and then be paying interest on them and be paying for them in a month or a year from now whenever you can't eat them again. We should not finance disposables or expendables. We should only finance those things which have a long lifespan and are worthy of being financed. I prefer not to finance a car. That's my personal preference. I'd rather drive an older car. But there's one sense whether you pay it in repairs or you pay it in interest. And it may be 6 of one and half a dozen the other, depending on how things work. I found that if you drive a car, get it paid for, and drive it a couple more years, most people are better off and spend less on those repairs. But if you don't plan for those repairs, then you're in a panic. There was this lady who called me a few years ago, and she was in a panic. And whenever I went to see her, there was this beautiful new Lexus out in front of her house. I didn't know it was hers. She just asked me to come and talk with her. And I talked with her that day, and she told me that she had just leased that new Lexus for $650 a month. That's a big payment for a Christian school teacher. Wow. And as I talked to her longer and longer, she had gotten into a pinch with her older car, and she told me that the old car, the dash lit up like a Christmas tree, and I'm sure it did. But her solution was to go across the street and to lease a brand new Lexus. Folks, leasing is the most expensive way to finance a car in most cases. We can get a really nice 3-4-year-old car that smells new and still has a lot of that 100,000-mile warranty left on it for a lot less, about half the cost of a new car. And a 3-year-old car has a lot of features of a new car. Let's move on through. When we look at the budget, we want to keep it simple. We can get lost in the weeds. I remember this lady I was visiting with some time ago. She's like, oh, I don't know how much I spend on my gas bill. It changes every month. Here's a simple solution. You can remember your highest bill last year. You can probably remember your lowest bill. Add them together and divide by 2 and call that your average. It's about right. Don't get lost in the weeds. Just figure it out and you'll be okay. Now, always round your expenses up and round your income down. Your expenses are likely to be higher this month because of COVID. You know, you need new extra toilet paper because you're not spending half your day at work and flushing at work. So you need to spend money on toilet paper for the house. So that expense has gone up for you this month. Expenses are likely to go up, so round them up. Your income, on the other hand, went down this month because you weren't working so much. Expect your income to take dips. Now, there are other things that may have gone down because your income went down. You're not driving to work every day. Maybe you're not buying things in the vending machine at 2 o'clock or buying lunch out. So maybe those expenses have gone down. But you always want to round your expenses down, round your income down and your expenses up when you're working with the budget. And then don't forget to include saving and giving. Now, on your homework last week, I asked this question. Do you actively plan for spending on giving and saving and large periodic expenses like cars or furniture or toys, jet ski, or frequent expenses. Do you plan for your frequent expenses? Do you expect that you're going to have a gas bill next month? Do you expect that you have to buy gasoline for the car? It happens over and over, so plan for it. So your homework was to make an inventory or to begin one. And I've sent some handouts to those attending today so that they can write down their expenses, and it'll be a memory jogger. Moving on. The overachievers want to really get into the details. There are a lot of little daily expenses that we just drop. We rent a movie, we buy an energy drink or a Starbucks or something, and those add up. $3 a day, 5 or 6 days a week, suddenly is $20. And $20 a week is $80 to $100 a month. And $100 a month is well over $1,000 a year. It adds up. And the cash envelope system can help us keep track of where those little things go. Give yourself some pocket money, $25, $50 a week. Keep track of it. Set it aside in your wallet or an envelope and only spend from that cash, and you'll be more aware of what you've spent and how much you have left. All right, now our spending plan. We're talking about it in general here. We want to know what comes in, what goes out, and now we want to start analyzing what is necessary, and remember, necessary is necessary, and what is optional. I think I told you last week about my shirt with the frayed sleeves. It's optional for me to replace that shirt because I have many others. I'm not desperate yet. Sometimes it would do us well to thin that closet down a little bit more. Now, we want to write it down so that we can be objective. Many times we can make these lists in our head, and as we go through life, we forget parts or we begin to fudge numbers. When we write down numbers and add, subtract, multiply, and divide, it gives us facts. It's interesting to me. I have some budgets from the past years, and it's interesting to me to compare the way it is now to the way it used to be. You don't have to keep all of that. Now, on the income side of the budget, let's keep it simple. How much money hits your bank account each month? When we get our pay stubs, there are taxes, there's Social Security, there might be healthcare costs, maybe life insurance, retirement money. Just write down how much hits the bank account because that's what you can spend. You can't spend that retirement money that was taken out of your paycheck. You can't spend that until you're 59 and a half unless something serious happens in your life. Why do I mention 59 and a half? Here's a money saving tip. If you reach into your retirement money, and retirement is a technical term, individual retirement account, IRA, 401k, 403, different things like that. Those are called qualified funds. And if you withdraw qualified funds, that is money set aside for your retirement, which typically happens after age 59 and a half. If you take that money out early, not only do you have to deal with the tax consequences, maybe you've never paid income tax on that money, so you owe it now, but you also get hit with a 10% penalty. So if, say, you need $10,000 to buy a car, and you're in a 30% tax bracket, then you really need something like $13,000 in order to pay your 30% taxes, and you're going to have a 10% penalty on that. So it's going to cost you maybe $14,000 to get that $10,000 out to buy a car. Maybe you'd be better off financing it or leasing it. You need to do the numbers and see the best way to go about it. It also hurts your future. I have friends who had, I was talking to one the other day, and they opened up and started telling me that this happened in 1995 and this happened in 2000 something. And now they're turning 66 and they have no retirement other than Social Security. But they did tell me everything was paid for except they had a few months left on one car, which really helped. Okay. When we look at income, we also want to know what's predictable and what's irregular. Many people get bonuses. Many people bank on their bonuses. Those bonuses are not guaranteed. Maybe your business gives out a quarterly bonus. How's that bonus going to look at the end of the second quarter of 2020 when that business was closed for several months? they might have run red and there might not be a bonus there. So don't spend your bonuses until they're in your hand. Now on the expense side, and we're going to circle through this income and expense idea several times because it has to kind of settle into our minds. But giving and saving need to be considered expenses. Remember, we plan ahead for expenses. If we wait until we spend everything that we want and ask how much is left and how much can we save, it'll all be gone almost every time. So plan ahead. A good number is 10% for giving and 10% for saving. Many of us can do more if we're deliberate about it and intentional. Now, next I have food and shelter. Food and shelter are necessities. I think I mentioned last week, we used to live in a 4,000 square foot farmhouse that a doctor had built. I thought I got a great bargain on it because it was $100-some thousand under the appraisal whenever I bought it. But it was still really big for us to move in with my parents, and we had two families making the payments, and had everything here in North Carolina sold, and we had the same mortgage there that we had here, the mortgage payment would have been the same, except taxes were twice as high. And I hadn't planned for an extra few $100s a month, nor had I adequately planned out what would happen whenever mom and dad got older and how we would continue making those payments. Now you might think you're just going to sell it. I tried for about 7 years and it didn't sell. And whenever a buyer finally came along, we were very happy to unload that albatross of a house. Food and shelter are essential, but maybe we need to have food and shelter that are suited to our needs. When we talk about saving money here in a few minutes, I'll give you some ideas about saving money on food, because that's something that we can change quickly. If you need to save money on shelter, that'll take a little bit longer. Might take years in our case. Now, transportation and communication are essential. We can choose different types of transportation though. You know, we can choose to carpool. We can choose to call a cab and not own a car. And you say, Jeff, a cab costs me $30 or $50. But if you only need it once in a while, maybe that's cheaper than allowing, $150 a month for car depreciation or car repairs. You're going to spend $150 a month on a car, even if it's paid for, because every so many years you have to spend $500 or $600 on tires and another several $100s on brakes. And it always costs $100 or $200 a month, either in depreciation of a new car or in regular routine and deferred maintenance of an older car. That's what it costs to own a car. So it might be cheaper for you to take a cab. Communication is essential. We need a phone. But for $15 or $20 a month, you can still have a phone hanging on the wall in the kitchen. Every member of the household doesn't have to pay $40 or $50 or $75 a month for their personal cell phone with all kinds of data. Yeah, if everybody in the house is paying $50 a month, suddenly you're paying $150 or $200 a month for cell phones. There are less expensive ways to go about it. Sometimes we have to choke down the pride or the convenience of having that fancy new smartphone. If you need a smartphone, maybe you can buy one that's a year or two old on eBay or some other place. Those are tricky because not all phones work with all carriers, so you have to do your homework. But you'll probably save a lot of money if you buy a nice phone that's almost new, but not quite. Now, healthcare. Healthcare is a big expense, and I consider it essential. I consider it essential, and that probably means insurance, because we don't have time or money. I'm in my 50s. I could have a heart attack at any time, and that's $50,000 or $100,000 in bills, not including the lost income from work. So it's a lot less expensive for me to buy health insurance, even if it costs $1,000 a month, because we can come up with $1,000 every month, but we can't come up with $100,000 in 2 months because I had had a heart attack. And after I have a heart attack, it's going to take me months to get my act back together, if I get it back together. And my family needs income while I'm recuperating. So health insurance is critical. Now I'm going to speak for a moment to other types of insurance. Things like car insurance. If you have a $100 deductible, your car insurance is going to be much higher than if you have a $1,000 deductible. But you say, Jeff, that $1,000 deductible scares me. It won't scare you if you have $1,000 in your emergency fund. Put that $1,000 in your emergency fund and reconsider those deductibles, because that higher deductible really lowers your premium. You also need to understand the difference between collision and comprehensive whenever it comes to car insurance. I've said before, I drive an old Cadillac. My Cadillac insurance is just a few $100s a year because I don't carry collision and comprehensive on it anymore. It's not worth it. If someone hits me at a stop sign out here at the corner, that Cadillac's going to get totaled and I'm going to get a check for maybe $2,000, maybe not that much. It's not worth me paying several $100s a year extra to have collision insurance and comprehensive, so they'll give me $2,000. It'd be better for me to put that money in my reserve account to buy a new one, and I'm shopping for another one, and it won't be new. All right. Now, future income, that is an expense for now, but it is a necessary expense because we have to plan for income in the future. Whenever it comes to Social Security, before the impeachment, and nobody's talking about the impeachment anymore because it's all Corona, Corona, Corona. But before the impeachment, there was a lot of discussion about what's going to happen with Social Security, and it really affects me because in the year 2034, the ratios and things are supposed to look pretty lousy in the Social Security funds. And my Social Security is not expected to be quite as large as it was a few years ago because Social Security payments, more payments will be going out than are coming in. And just like your family budget, you can't spend more than you make, at least for too long, or it will break things. And the government has spent a lot of money in the last month or so. Now, credit and loans may be necessities or expenses. We'll talk about that a little more. And then there's just stuff. I don't know what the stuff is. It might be on the clearance rack at the grocery store, and you've got to have groceries. But maybe, I know I like to buy those donuts off the clearance rack in the back, but I don't need the calories. And I'd be better off not buying them, even though they appear to be a great price. So, your homework for this week, write down all sources of income. Be sure to note your irregular income. Maybe we can't count on that, and we need to consider that bonus income, but some of us do get periodic income. Sometimes older folks might set up, say, an annuity that sends them a payment once a year, and that once a year payment is pegged toward their property taxes. So they never have to worry about their property taxes. Or maybe they'll set up an annuity that sends them enough money every month to pay all their health care costs. So it becomes a wash and they never have to worry about that. But write down all of your regular income and then write down your irregular income as well. Now, write down your typical expenses and think about what is really necessary. You need to analyze that one and check your heart. A guy not so long ago, he told a couple of us other guys that he was in financial stress. And he said that they were going to come and repossess his rented furniture. And he sent back everything except his queen-size bed. One of us offered him an extra mattress that he could have had for free, but he insisted on renting his queen-size bed because he said, it's the only pride left in my life. And then we were talking a few weeks later, and he said, I just let them come and take my bed because someone gave me a full-size bed, and I can enjoy a full-size bed without any payments. His heart changed on that, and that bed changed from a necessity of pride to it's paid for. He's gotten his budget under control. Really figure out what is optional. Now, as you look at your bills, look at your bank statements and your credit card statements and look for those recurring charges and ask yourself why those charges are there. Has their purpose gone away? Do you really use those expenses? Pandora and Spotify are both free. but you have to listen to some ads. But do you have a subscription to both of them? Or maybe some other streaming or media service? There's a good chance that you've got redundancy going on there. Maybe you have cable TV and you also have Netflix and internet. A lot of things are free on the internet. So do you really need cable in addition to the internet? Or can you do away with one of them and keep the other? Also, look for missing, overlooked, and underfunded. I was working with some older folks one day, and I was digging through their pile of papers, and I came across some insurance papers. I asked them about them, and she was older. She was beginning to struggle mentally. She didn't recall, but she gave me permission to call the insurance company, and I did. She had just made a payment on that insurance policy about 6 weeks before, and she didn't remember. And it was a nice insurance policy. And I'm glad her daughter was there, because I was able to help the older parents make an inventory of all of their assets. And then their daughter took a copy of it. And we went through. The older guy, he told me he had 3 bonds in the medicine cabinet. I asked him how long they'd been there. And they'd been there about 20 years. Well, I asked him why he needed 3 bonds in the medicine cabinet. He said he didn't. And I said, well, that might do better in the gas tank or something else. They were 3 $50 bonds. They were worth more than $50 by that point, but not much. Remember the tax man. He's going to come. He's going to come once a year. You got to pay him. If you're self-employed, you have to plan for this even more, because you pay both sides of the Social Security equation. For people who work, loosely speaking, the employer pays half the Social Security, about 6-7%. And you pay 6 or 7%. But if you're self-employed, you have to pay both sides of that, which comes out to be about 15%. And you better plan on it, especially if you're making much money. And you want to pay Social Security, because the more you pay, the more they give you back later, assuming they're still in business. Let's move on and talk about saving money. Statistically, if you spend cash, you will spend about 30 to 40% less than if you spend plastic. When we run to some fast food store with cash, we're keeping track of what we've got. It's in our little envelope, even if that envelope is just the slot in our wallet. We're keeping track of it more or less conscientiously. When we spend plastic, we don't think about it. It just goes through, and it was there and it's spent. I learned with my kids that we could go to the fast food and eat off the dollar menu for $3 or $4 per child. But if they ordered that meal plan, it was going to be $5, $6, $7, or $8 per child. And there were always 6 of us in the car. And 3 times 6 is less than $20. But 5 times 6 or 6 times 6 is $30 or $40. So pay attention. Another place that you can save a lot of money. I went to a church in Wisconsin, and a guy worked for a company, and I asked him what he did. He said, I sell sweet drinks, soda. Soda is a big expense. You can go to the Cracker Barrel and buy a nice meal for $10 or $11, maybe $12. You can get a nice meal. And then you can spend $2 or $2.50 for a soda or sweet tea. That ends up being 20% of your bill. And after you pay taxes on that, and pay the server because they gave you good service, that 20% that you spend on the drink might become 25% or more. You can reduce your dining out expenses by a quarter if you'll drink water. You'll also reduce your medical expenses. Oftentimes you can split plates. We found with our boys that rather than buying each of them an individual package of fries, we could buy a supersize package of fries and split them among a couple of boys. Or maybe I would just eat 3 or 4 of them, and I'd sacrifice my personal supersize fries. And that helped me control what I ate, but it also cut a couple of dollars out of the meal. Desserts, split them. You can do that. Lots of expensive desserts at restaurants come with 2 or 3 forks. It's okay. In the COVID world, you might want to cut those with your butter knife, but you can exercise good sense. Now, when we lived in Florida, My wife and I like to go to a very fine restaurant called Jackson's. We would go for birthdays and anniversaries just a couple of times a year. The normal meal at that time, and this would be more than 15 years ago, but the normal meal started about $39 and went up. But if we went before 5:30, we could get that same meal for 20 bucks. So 20 for me and 20 for her, that's 40. We would deal with tax and tip and those kinds of things, and we could be out of there for $50 or $60. Unless, of course, we also had soft drinks and coffee and. But if we went after 5:30, that same $50 meal would cost us $100. Just look it up. It's all on the internet. There was a fine restaurant called Fox and Hounds in Wisconsin. It was beautiful. It was built in the 50s. It was very rustic and set back. You drove past a lake. It was just beautiful. They had a buy one, get one free special, and we'd go in and get a $25 prime rib, and it was buy one, get one free. So 2 of us could eat prime rib for $25. But that buy one, get one free was only good during certain hours. So do your research. Sometimes, I know Carrabba's sent me an email the other day that I could buy if I bought a $100 gift card, they'd give me a $20 gift card. That's a 20% savings. It makes it much more affordable to go to Carrabba's. But maybe you can go to Costco or Sam's and buy that $100 gift card for $80. So you can still plan to spend $100 taking your family out for a meal, but it only costs you $80. So those are some ways that you can save money. You can also save money buying family style. Maybe it's less expensive to buy a big pizza and bring it home than it is to go to McDonald's and have everyone order for themselves. Use coupons only if you would normally buy that product. Sometimes we spend money because we have a coupon or because it's on sale for things that we wouldn't normally buy. Now it might be okay to try something out that way. Be careful about buying in bulk. It is true that we save money per item when we buy in bulk. But if we waste or don't use those items, maybe we shouldn't buy in bulk. Also, compare locations. My wife tells me that certain Walmart stores cost a lot less than others. I had no idea that Walmart prices varied, but sometimes she'll shop at one and sometimes she'll shop at the other. That's true for many kinds of stores. I know when we lived in Pensacola especially, there were Goodwill stores and thrift shops. The thrift shops on the wealthy side of town were the same prices as the thrift shops on the poor side of town. But guess what was donated on the wealthy side of town? My kids were well dressed in name brand clothes, and a lot of them came from the thrift store. You can also use Marketplace, that would be Facebook, Craigslist, consignment stores, yard sales, and thrift stores. But be careful. Sometimes we go to yard sales and buy things that are broken or things that we don't need just because the price is low. Buying things that are low price that we don't need is a waste of that little bit of money. And if we collect that little bit of money that we keep spilling out, we'll have a lot more. Probably the biggest tip I have here, though, is spend cash, because we're more conscientious of what we spend when we're spending paper dollars. Homework for this week. You need to write down all of your debts. Now, this is preparing for next week. I've already given you a handout for your budget, and you can fill that out. Be careful about getting lost in the weeds, but do be thorough. Fill out your budget. Now, whenever we're talking about debt and preparing for next week, debt is a big expense. If we take our mortgage out, many people are still spending 20, 30, or 40% of their income on debt service. There are 3 big expenses that we have in our lives: taxes, mortgage, which part of that should be going toward principal reduction, but that's our housing, and we're going to spend a lot of that even if we're renting. And the next one is debt service. Debts come and go. The reason the taxes are so big is because we pay taxes on everything we earn, all of our lives. So write down your debts and be sure to include your interest rate. Now, next week, I'll tell you about the rule of 72, which helps us to understand how often interest doubles. If we're investing And our money, it tells us how many years it takes our money to double. But on the credit side, that's the creditors investing in us because we're paying the interest to them. And it'll tell us how many years it takes for our expense to them to double. You know, when you buy a house and finance it over 30 years, you pay for that house maybe 3 times or maybe more. Most of that is all interest. Be sure to write down the frequency of payment. The more frequently that you pay, it's just like compounding. The more frequent things are compounded in our favor, the more we make. But on the other hand, the more frequently the interest formula is compounded, the more the creditor makes. But write down the frequency of payment. Write down the minimum payment. Most credit cards have a $25, $35, $50 a month minimum payment, regardless of your balance. Frequently, the minimum balance may be 1% of the balance. I have a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, and that minimum payment is 1% of the balance. Sometimes the payment is 2% of the balance, but there's usually a bottom number down there as well that says $35 or $45 a month. That means if you only owe $50, you have to pay $35 a month for it, because they're not going to give you that 1% or 2%. They're going to make you pay at least $35. Pay attention to late fees. Late fees can be very expensive. ATM fees are expensive. Oh, it's only $1.75, but $1.75 ATM fee on a $10 takeout. Wow, that's like $17 on 100. That's 17%. Yeah, just add 1 0 to the 10 and 1 0 to the $1.75, and that becomes $17.50 now. So it would cost us $17.50 on $100. Now, I know if you take out $100, it still only costs $1.75, but that's proportional. That is a fee per transaction. And that $1.75 might be very affordable if you're taking out several $100s. It might be cheaper than driving across town to get the money another way. But spending $1.75 or $3.50 for an ATM so that you can yank out $25, that's very expensive. That is like a 15, 16, 17% fee for using your ATM. Maybe you should go to McDonald's and buy some chewing gum and give it to someone so that you don't have to pay that ATM fee. Get an extra $20 out at some grocery store or someplace like that, because the extra purchase would be less expensive than that fee that you're paying. Now, whenever you're talking about those debts, write down why you borrowed that money. If you can't remember, you're in trouble, because now you're making payments and you don't even know why. I hope you remember. Write down the lost opportunities and what you'd rather have, and write down the stress that debt causes you. This will help you get the debt in perspective. Stress of debt and finances really takes a lot of our energy. So that's your homework for next week. Now, remember that when we lie to ourselves, we are both the victim and the perpetrator. So there's double jeopardy there. My son was digging a hole one day for me to put in a fence post at the farm. He was all excited, and he didn't ask where the hole had to go. So he dug the hole. I went out and said, "But son, I need the hole here." He's like, "Oh, that's okay." He liked to dig holes. But remember, when we dig a hole and it's in the wrong place, we have to fill it back up. And then we have to go somewhere and dig the hole again in the right place. So we had to dig it, fill it, and dig again. 3 times the effort, because he jumped the gun and didn't dig the hole in the right place. He said he liked to dig, and I liked to keep him busy at that time. So that was okay. There was value in keeping him busy. But as we grow older, we want to spend our time digging holes in the right place where we plan to use those holes. Here's some money-saving takeaways. Write down 3 money-saving tips that you can use to improve your cash flow. Using cash is a big tip. Not drinking sweet drinks. That's a big tip. They're $2 at the store, at the restaurant for a little glass or tumbler, but for $1.25 or $1.50, you can have a 2 liter. So drink your sweet drinks at home and leave the really expensive small servings, leave those behind the counter. Those are 2 quick tips that I remember. Take a moment, pause the video, and write down some of the money saving tips. You might want to run it back a couple of minutes and go through that list of splitting meals, buying gift cards at 20% discount, lots of things like that. Now also write down questions that you want to talk about at the end of this class. Remember, this is a very valuable class. I've told you how you can save hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. That's a good message that you want to share with your friends. So invite them to come for next week. They can join, they can watch today's video, and they can watch last week's video. In order to find these videos, just go to YouTube and search Open Door Archdale, and all of our videos will show up there. Most of the financial videos have the financial banner in their thumbnail. Be sure to call them, invite them, and then call them and remind them, and let us know you're coming so that we can send you the login links for the Zoom, as well as any handouts that we're using. Now, in upcoming weeks, we'll be talking about protection. I touched a little bit on the value of health insurance today and how we can control some of our expenses of car insurance. The government requires us to have car insurance. Our bank or mortgage holder requires us to protect their investment. In upcoming weeks, we'll get into different ways we can protect. We might want to insure our future income, or we might want to insure our health or our ability to make money if we're sick. I'm a little passionate about this because whenever my mother went to work, she was making more money than my father. But my mother became an invalid. She had multiple sclerosis for more than 50 years. And for about 30 years, she was bedfast. That was very expensive. We're thankful that my father had enough income to take care of that. And many people supported us through the years. But plan now for those expenses. They will happen. We don't know how soon or how long or how severe, but you're going to have a flat tire. Your refrigerator is going to break. And your washers, like I told you last week, your washer lock is going to get stuck, and then you're going to have quarantine clothes that you can't get out of the washer. And somebody has to figure that out. We'll also be talking about future income because we need to put away money today and delay that income from today to the future. That's called retirement income. Now, in order to begin thinking about that, I want to remind you, how do you want your finances to look this time next year? Or how do you want your finances to look 5 or 10 years from now? Begin to try to write down what it's like. Take your age and add 10 years. I'm 53 today. How do I want things to look when I turn 63? Well, I'll tell you, I want everything to be paid for. And I'm on target to have our house paid off by 60. We'll see how that works out. The Lord may have other things in mind. But whenever I get to 60, I want to think about being grandpa and retiring and working for fun, working because I enjoy it, working because I love work, not working because I have to survive. Write your press release, or better yet, write your obituary and date it for your 65th birthday or your 55th birthday. What do you want your obituary to say? Those become goals. Just like our budget, we choose where we spend our money. We choose. If your goal is a brand new Lexus, that might not be wrong, but you got to choose to put your money on a brand new Lexus rather than on a new couch or feeding your kids. You get to choose where that is, and you have to choose the right priorities. That's pretty severe for me to say, but sadly, some families that I've worked with have bought luxury items at the expense of necessities for their children. That's not a good thing. Few takeaways here. Use time to your advantage and take action today. I can take your money away today. Things can be stolen from you. You can earn money again, assuming you're in good health. Time only goes one way. Our clock is ticking down. And when we combine the value of time with the value of money, we can make the money work for us over time. If you'd like to talk about something else, jot us an email. You can email me at drjeffcrum@gmail.com or send it through the church email, opendoorarchdale@gmail.com. The next 4 weeks, we'll continue talking about ways to save money, to increase our income and reduce expenses. Next week in particular, we're going to be talking about 4 different methods to pay down those credit cards. Some methods pay one thing down a little faster than another, but we'll talk about those differences, and then you can choose the best method for you. Next week, I have a spreadsheet that I'll share with you. You can plug in your numbers and play with them and see which method works for you. It'll tell you how long it takes you to get out of debt, assuming you make a recipe and then cook the recipe. If you just play with the recipe but never cook it and eat it, it will not work for you. You must take action. We need to prepare for setbacks, and that could be through insurance things and preparing for large future expenses that probably involve some investments. Then we want to later on talk about leaving a stress-free legacy. You need a will, folks. If you don't have a will, somebody else is going to make those decisions. Wills are free. You can print one off the internet. It might not be the very best, but it's better than nothing. So have something. There are better things than wills too. And again, they can be affordable if you know where to go. Invite a friend to these weeks. Now, we're coming to the end here. Oops, I went one slide too many. But I want you to enjoy these financial freedom workshops. I look forward to talking with you. Now we'll stop the recording, and if you have any questions, we'll discuss those now, where you can be private. I look forward to seeing you next week. Bring a friend.